Hey guys, welcome back to Edpuzzle. Just want to do a quick review video for our test on Wednesday. Just want to take you through some of the main key points of Reconstruction. I went over the test essay with you, but remember the idea is um, the main idea of the essay is, should we consider Reconstruction a success or a failure? And hopefully I'll take you through that real quick, and you can be ready for the test. So when we look at Reconstruction, right, we think about that it's the time period when we were trying to bring the South back into the Union, rebuild the Civil War. And there's two different ways to do that. We can take the prodigal son approach of Abraham Lincoln, which is the 10% plan, a more lenient view in order to encourage them to return peacefully and with as little hostility and opposition as possible. There's also the state suicide view. That's the idea of radical Republicans, that we need to punish the South at all costs, make them pay for what they did in starting the Civil War. And certainly, there's a real back and forth with members of Congress and Lincoln until his assassination in 1865. After that, Reconstruction falls to President Andrew Johnson, who is a Southerner, right, a former Democrat, former slave owner. That was really a Machiavellian appointment by Lincoln, and Congress will have absolutely nothing to do with him in his idea of Reconstruction. So the radical Republicans are going to really take the lead on Reconstruction because Johnson has really no political clout whatsoever. They will create a series of laws, the Reconstruction Act of 1867. They will enact the Freedmen's Bureau, right, which was designed to help African Americans. They'll pass the 13th Amendment, all in an attempt to aid African Americans following the Civil War. We'll also see the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments. However, as we know, real problems emerge in opposition from the South. Because of this headstrong attitude and approach by radical Republicans in Congress, Southerners are incredibly opposed to really the lightning fast changes that are occurring in the South. Remember, you had a society that for nearly 200 years was based on the hierarchy of race and dominated by wealthy plantation owners. Now you've completely turned that on its head. As a result, we're going to see as states begin to re-enter the Union, they begin to re-elect many of the same men who put that hierarchy into place before the Civil War. And they're going to begin to pass laws like black codes, which we talked all about, right? What we know as Jim Crow laws that will really restrict the rights of free African Americans in the South. We'll see the emergence of sharecropping, which is really just a cycle that perpetuates the poverty of former slaves. We'll see the rise of the KKK, right? We'll talk about all of the voter suppression that we read about in our article. And this infuriates Congress. So despite the fact that they're bringing them back into the Union, the states are doing all of these really reprehensible things. So the South will respond, Congress will respond by passing the 14th Amendment, which I mentioned earlier. Remember, this is opposed by Johnson. He goes around the country explaining to states why they should not vote and ratify the 14th Amendment, right? And this will really lead to a confrontation between Johnson and Congress. He becomes known as King Veto for his use of veto in Reconstruction laws. And Congress has gotten to the point where they are sick of it. So in 1867, they passed the Tenure of Office Act. If you remember, that was a totally unconstitutional law placing limits on presidential hiring and firing capabilities, all as a bait to get Johnson into impeachment. And Johnson obliges. He's going to fire his Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton. Remember, I told you he locks himself in his office and refuses to come out, all because Johnson wants his day in court. He wants to prove that Congress passed a law that was unconstitutional. So the House will vote for 11 articles of impeachment, the main one being that he broke the Tenure of Office Act. Remember, we read Article 10 for verbally assaulting Congress, being mean to them. And the trial is held in the Senate, just like the Constitution assigns. The votes are tallied. Johnson is found not guilty by just one vote. Remember, Senator Edmund Ross from Kansas is the deciding swing vote who makes him not guilty. And you actually buy tickets, believe it or not. It's kind of funny. You see that down in the bottom corner. 1868, Johnson is not going to be up for re-election. He actually goes home to Tennessee and returns to being a Democrat in the Senate. But we're going to maintain the Republican stronghold on the White House. Ulysses S. Grant, the war hero, is going to run on the Waving the Bloody Shirt campaign. If you remember, we talked about that, to easily win the election of 1868, which you see here in the electoral map, even though the colors are reversed for some reason that I don't understand. With a real novice in the White House, the radical Republicans, now that they've gotten rid of Johnson, can go back to doing the whole idea of Reconstruction. They're going to pass the 15th Amendment. And now we're going to see African-American voters registering in waves, joining elections in waves. However, again, because you have this rapid transition of power in the South, Democrats, in the South are going to fight back. You have former slaves that are taking political office, carpetbaggers that are dominating Southern life. You have the scalawags that are now replacing former wealthy plantation owners, and they're just not having any of this. So as a result, they are going to push back tremendously. And what we're going to get is the return of white rule in the South. These redeemer governments, as they were called, bringing back the South to the way it was and the way they think it should be. Done through the KKK, done through voter suppression, done through the creation of the Solid South. And despite the efforts of President Grant and Congress, this is going to continue to be cemented by the Supreme Court. Remember, we talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. Creating separate but equal facilities is okay as long as states are providing African Americans with their own facilities. Now, we know the hypocrisy here. We talked about that. The idea that white prejudicial politicians are going to be the ones determining the equality of these. And this will legislate racial segregation in the South, create the Jim Crow era that we know of that will last until the 60s. As if that wasn't bad enough, we're really going to end on a real sour note with the election of 1876. Remember, it's the country's centennial, and the country's ready to really move on from Reconstruction. It's been such a disaster so far. There's been so much opposition from the South. Really, you could blame a lot of it because Lincoln wasn't able to follow through on his idea of Reconstruction, and the nation's just ready to move on. And we're going to end with an incredibly corrupt election. Remember, Samuel Tilden, the Democratic nominee, wins the popular vote, but there are 4 states up for grabs that are going to send multiple electors to the Electoral College, and we have a real decision to make as to which set of electors we should take. So we don't have a contingency for this in the Constitution, so Congress is going to establish a 15-person committee that will decide basically who the winner is. There are 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats on the committee. So, of course, they vote for the Republican nominee, Hayes, to win. Democrats are not happy with this. They're going to hold their ground and force a compromise. And this is called the Compromise of 1877. It's achieved just a few days before the election and is incredibly corrupt. Democrats allow the Republicans to take back the White House. They'll let Hayes be the winner, even though he's the minority candidate, right? He didn't win the most popular votes, but they're going to want a whole bunch of stuff in return. They're going to get him to remove bayonet rule from the South. They're going to require that he puts a Southerner in the cabinet so that the South can be a part of the discussion at the federal level, and require that the federal government provides subsidies and money to pay for all the damage as a result of the Civil War. Even though it's their fault, the North is going to have to pay for the destruction of the South. And this paves the way now, without any government or military interference, for the South to resume life the way it was before the war, right? To establish Jim Crow era stuff until really 1954 and even into the early 60s as well. So, we could certainly sit here and argue that Reconstruction was successful. It did bring back the Union. It did bring all the Southern states back by 1877. It accomplished that goal. We could certainly argue, and I would hope that you could give several examples of how Reconstruction was a complete failure.